I think that looks like it's slowed. So good morning, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day. I'm Sam Jordan. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of InfoTrack UK, so I'll be hosting today. We're going to be talking about how you can use data to meet your compliance and regulatory responsibilities. I'm going to introduce the other speakers in a moment, but obviously this is a topic that's very important, very interesting, and something that at InfoTrack and at PracticeEvolve we are keen to be able to help you with by using our platforms. In a minute, you will be hearing from Amy Bell, who is the founder of Teal Compliance and is our compliance expert today, and also Adam Bullion, who is the General Manager of Marketing for the PracticeEvolve Group. Before we do that, just draw your attention to the Q&A button, which is probably located at the bottom of your screen. If you want to ask any questions today, just pop them in that Q&A there rather than the chat. So use the Q&A. I will then make sure that we get through as many of those as possible at the end of the session once Amy's finished presenting. If there is anything that I can't cover in that time, we'll come back to you directly. So we should be able to cover everything. We're due to finish at 11:45 or whenever we run out of questions. Probably be 11:45 if previous sessions like this are anything to go by. So I will hand over now to Adam to introduce himself and talk a little bit about PracticeEvolve.
Thanks, Sam. Do you want to move the slide on as well?
Yeah.
Please. Thank you. Sorry. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the intro, Sam. And yeah, delighted to see really good numbers on this webinar for compliance. I appreciate we've got some SOS, Line Time and PracticeEvolve clients on the webinar today, but we've also got a number of you who don't use any of that particular software. So just as a quick overview as to who PracticeEvolve are, we're a global legal software provider, and we're providing firms with end-to-end practice management solutions. And we service just over 35,000 users, and that's across 1,200 law firms. Operating in the UK, Ireland, and Australia, we employ just over 200 members of staff. Those 200 members of staff, we all share the same sort of ethos and passion, which is to ensure law firms are employing technology that really helps them succeed in delivering operational efficiencies, whether that's in terms of user efficiency, cost efficiency, or even client efficiencies. And I think generally we're all used to this term of software as a service, but what we're trying to do is provide software with a service. And that service is formed of three key pillars. The first one being cloud, so cloud technology that helps reduce your cost and your risk. Connectivity, so connecting you with more of the software you require, obviously including InfoTrack, just to make sure that everything's more compliant, but also easier for you and minimizing human error, I suppose, as well. And then finally, competency as well. We want to make sure that our users are improving their knowledge how to use the software in the right way to maximize the potential and minimize sort of risks that are associated with the likes of compliance. That's who PracticeEvolve are. We'll come back at the end and talk a little bit more as well, but I'll now hand over back to Sam, I think, and back to Sam.
Thank you, Adam. So I'm going to skip the InfoTrack bit, if that's okay. I think everybody in here probably knows who we are and what we do. And if we don't, draw me a message. I happily to chat about it, but we're going to get straight to the main event. Let's let Amy talk a little bit about what we're here to do today.
Perfect, thanks, Sam. So hi to everybody. Valentine's Day, I've got specially matching pink hair because you know it's festive. And if you've not met me before, my name's Amy Bell. I'm director and founder of Teal Compliance. We help law firms with all the rules and the regulations that they need to follow. I'm best known for my work in anti-money laundering, and I'm grateful to Sam in particular for inviting me several times to speak to you about anti-money laundering. But today I've got a completely different thing to talk about, which is how you can use the data in your systems to help get a better handle on your compliance, find out what's not working, find out what you've tried and you need to tweak, things like that. So we're going to have a look at what compliance is for, essentially, and the most common reasons for claims that we see out there, and how later on, using your systems, you can start to anticipate things starting to go wrong before they turn into claims, which is, of course, $24,000 question, isn't it? $64,000 question. How do we stop claims is a problem I'm trying to solve alongside stopping baddies. I will also talk about client due diligence and source of funds and the tech that you can use there and how that can improve your compliance near the end. As Sam said, I'm very happy to take questions. We'll see if we've got time to cover some of them in the session, but otherwise the team will send them to me and I will try my best to answer them. So, okay, when I talk about things, Sam, next slide, please. When I talk about compliance, I'm generally talking around this model that I built called Compliance That Works. It's the 6 C's of compliance. And essentially compliance, getting it to work is about having a machine of several components that all have to be connected to each other, all have to be working in the right order. Compliance, essentially, what's it for? Well, it's all about making sure that we're providing a great client service. I did a poll on this actually just last week on LinkedIn, very scientific poll, obviously, but it was what do we think compliance is for? And thankfully, happily for me, about 57% of people currently, I think the poll is still open, 57% think that compliance is about protecting people, and that's absolutely right, especially when it comes to law. We're a people-driven business. Yes, we use technology to support us, and we're all interested in, you know, these chatbot things, there's AI that's come in, but at the moment, we're all delivering this service by people. And when we talk to people about claims, one of the really interesting things is that they raise a term that Adam just coined actually in his intro, human error. Like, human error is a given when it comes to claims. Of course, a human was involved in it. When we're looking at the causes of claims, we're interested in being curious as to why that happened rather than blaming the individual. So generally, when I look at causes of claims, yes, we've got human error in there, or lack of attention to detail, or all these kinds of things where you can say it's somebody's fault. I'm not really interested in that. I'm interested in how do we have policies and procedures to close down these risks, and if they're working or not. So just briefly, compliance that works, as I say, it's 6 C's of compliance. You need to have clarity in what you're expected to do as a compliance officer, and also clarity about how your business approaches its risk. Because it's not the same. There's like a continuum of it. Some firms are like me, very, very risk averse. Other firms are commercial and like, I'm going to tolerate that level of risk. Every firm's different, and it's important that you understand your level of risk before trying to tackle claims, or causes of claims, because the mechanisms that you deploy to manage that will vary based on your risk appetite. You need to have capacity to do it. You need to resource it properly. I know that for many, many firms that we work with, and small to medium firms, you're doing other things in the business at the same time as trying to do compliance. So you might be running the business, you might be in charge of marketing, business development, you might also have fee earning. And so it's really difficult to find enough time to do it. So getting the right capacity, helping people in the team, outsourcing it. Obviously, other providers are available to help you with outsourcing, not just us, but making sure that you've resourced that properly. The way that you communicate about compliance is super important. I come across many, many people who've been on compliance training courses and, you know, it was death by PowerPoint, or it was just so dull. And then, you know, I come in and you know, people are like, oh, I've never heard anyone with such passion for compliance. We've got to engage people in compliance. It's got to be relevant. They've got to understand why it matters to them. And one of the most important, but the very often, in fact, nearly always overlooked step in my program is to make sure that you gain people's commitment. Here's the thing about people in law firms. They don't break promises. It's fundamental to who we are as lawyers that you don't break a promise. So if you ask people to promise to do something, they will do it. If you give them a vague policy and procedure that they can say, oh, I don't see how that applied to me, then they might not do it. But if you get them to promise, then you probably are going to get better compliance. Now, there's that saying, isn't there? What gets measured gets done. And one of the problems that we have in the legal sector compared to other industries that have compliance is we don't check it's working often. I'm talking here about control frameworks. So a control framework is where you've put a policy in place, you've got a procedure to make sure that policy comes alive, and then you have a control which checks it's working. You see this if you go into a McDonald's toilet, okay? Go into a McDonald's toilet, somewhere there's a policy that says we are going to make sure we've got clean toilets for everybody. We want everyone to have a nice experience when they come to our toilets. There's a procedure that says somebody must go in the toilets every hour to check they've got toilet roll and the toilets are flush and it's all lovely and clean. And the control for that is that they have to sign the sheet on the back of the door. You've all seen one. That's a control, because McDonald's head office, they're not coming around to look at all the toilets and make sure they've got toilet roll in them. They're collecting the sheets in to see if somebody's done the work. Now, obviously, someone can just tick a box to say they've done it and not done it. We'll come on to that a bit later on, how people game your system. But it's an attempt to make sure the policy is being followed, that it's consistently applied. And consistency is super important. The quickest way to trash a compliance program is to let one person get away with not doing it. One person, one influential person. Now, that doesn't have to be an equity partner. That could just be Betty, who's been in the secretarial pool for years, and he says, I'm just not doing it. And then everyone else who knows Betty follows. And it is particularly important when you're using IT. That we are consistent in our approach in asking people, and that when people refuse to comply, there are consequences. Quite often when we look at compliance programs, policies and procedures, we will see very vague language about disciplinary. Compliance with this policy is compulsory, and any firm that doesn't will be disciplined. Any person who doesn't will be disciplined. And then I say, well, what does that mean then? What are you going to do with them? You take them out in a car park and shoot them, or what's going to happen? And it's just vague. And actually, it never happens because nobody really knows what needs to do. We need to get super clear on what we are going to do if people don't comply, and we need to follow through with it. Now, the biggest cog in my picture is the culture one. Now, obviously, we're a compliance business, so we don't necessarily always fix this ourselves, but we definitely identify it as we're going along, and we will advise firms to start thinking about any cultural issues that they have. One of the most challenging issues is the lack of people's ability to have honest and difficult conversations. I'm going to talk about that a bit later on. But culture, if you haven't got a culture from top down, but remember, not just at the equity partnership, I'm talking at all the levels of the business where you've got influencers, they all need to be bought into your culture of compliance. If they're not, unfortunately, you're not going to do as well. Next slide, please, Sam. So let's get into when compliance doesn't work, where it isn't being followed. You know, the net, if compliance is about providing great client service and protecting people, then we shouldn't have any claims. I mean, that's the whole point of it, right? But we do have claims. We have loads of them every year. And not all the firms have loads of claims. But the industry is massive, isn't it? It costs us a huge amount. If firms that are on today, I'm sure many of you are, do conveyancing, you'll be well aware of the cost of professional indemnity insurance premium. That has been rising over the last few cycles as people have left the market because they're not quite as attracted to the insurance market in solicitors PII. It's very rarely that we have claims that are brand new, that are things that we never anticipated. I mean, there was a time when we didn't have cyber attacks and then they started, obviously. But most causes of claims, most claims have been seen before. So why are we still having them then? You might wonder. If we know what causes them, why are we still having them? The most common ones are mislimitation, which is all about key dates compliance, making sure you tackle the key dates compliance. Providing the wrong advice. Now, that's not necessarily that lawyers are wrong in law. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's because the scope hasn't been established properly, so you don't actually understand the instructions properly, which leads you to give inaccurate advice. Failure to provide advice to somebody who just doesn't know what they're supposed to be doing. Drafting errors, which can be because of the use of precedence, or can be as a result of poor supervision. Quite often when we look at the secondary causes of claims, like why did that happen then, we do get supervision flagged up as one of the contributing factors, poor supervision, lack of supervision, and especially in this day and age when we've had to adjust to hybrid working at home. We used to have very regular supervision processes, which included just overhearing things when you were walking around the office. These things don't happen the same way anymore. And as a result of that, people aren't necessarily getting picked up if they're struggling, getting picked up if they're making mistakes. And, you know, we are yet to see the fallout of that disruption caused by the huge change in working style that COVID brought us and has left us with people wanting to have, you know, more flexible work arrangements. Our policies and procedures need to catch up to tailor for those. And as I've said at the bottom, one of the common contributory factors is that we often see that when these things culminate in a claim, it's not necessarily a surprise. I do a lot of work with insurers. I work with Lockton in particular, the insurance broker, and I speak to quite a few underwriters. And one of the things that they tell me is that when they're asking a firm about claims history, about issues that they've had with a particular person, quite often they're told, well, it's okay, that person doesn't work here anymore, so we won't have that problem. But that's the last thing they want to hear, folks. They want to know why these things happen and how you're going to stop it happening again. Yes, there might be some factors about that particular person, but how did it end up turning into a claim? And often when I start asking firms about that, I start kind of trying to dig a bit deeper into the root cause. It was somebody was embarrassed to say, felt difficult to say, or someone who was working with them felt unable to speak up and say that that person was having a problem. And as I say, this goes to the challenges we have, as we're very polite, I think, in having difficult conversations in law firms. We've got to have better conversations. We can't shy away from conversations, because this is how these things keep happening. Next slide, please. So drilling down into those a little bit, I love root cause analysis. It's one of my favorite things. I talk about it loads. And basically it's, we've all set off, you've all got manuals, right? You've all got policies and procedures somewhere. But if you're having claims, you're having complaints, you're having missed fee earning targets, something's not going to plan somewhere, because you set these policies and procedures hoping that they would get you from A to B safely, and something's going wrong. And so I do advise quite detailed root cause analysis into issues if you really want to get a handle on how to avoid claims. And that is where you start drilling into your data. What do you know about what's happened? So root causes of key dates. Well, you know, there's a few that we come across. They don't know where to put the dates. They don't know how to use the system. Okay, they didn't do the IT training. They weren't paying attention to the IT training. Now, it's not that common for me to start a new job. It's a long time ago since I was like a new person in a new job. But I do remember my first day at a firm I worked at here in Manchester. I worked there for 12 years. My first day was just IT training. My head was battered, and they showed me every bit of system that they had, and I only remembered the bit that I went away straight away and used. So, you know, we just have to be aware of this, especially when you've got Betty who won't use the tech that you've got to manage this risk. You've got to have a little think about it. No offense to anyone who's called Betty who's on, by the way. It's just the first name I come up with. So they don't know where to put the dates. They don't know how to use the system. The dates were not checked. So often firms will have a fail safe. This person's supposed to respond to this date, and it's supposed to alert somebody else to check it. That's something that I call action list blindness. Action list blindness, when there are so many actions, including supervisory tasks on someone's to-do list generated by the system, they just don't look at it. When you're creating templates and things, when you're creating workflows, you've got to be conscious of this. If you drop in every bit of activity in the workflow from day one into someone's activity and they start getting behind, they've been on holiday for a couple of weeks, suddenly their action list can get to 200 or 300 activities. They're not going to see the critical ones in there. So understanding how this information presents to the person who's supposed to be responsible, and making sure that they can draw their attention to it properly. Or I love this one, delegate it to someone else who didn't do it. So here's an interesting thing. A lot of key dates policies that we see talk about the lawyer putting the key date in the system. That is the lawyer's responsibility to do it. Who do you think they delegate it to? Their support staff, who's not been on the training, doesn't always understand the significance of the date that they're being able to capture. And then obviously the process doesn't exist to check they've done it, because it's not supposed to be them doing it in the first place. Now listen, we can't run law firms without great support staff. When it comes to something that we know causes claims and we're putting someone responsible for it, then we really should have that person doing it. But there you go. Next one, please, Sam. Now, initial instructions, what are the root causes of this? So where they've failed to give the right advice, they've given the wrong advice, as I say, it might be because they've not captured their instructions properly. And it can be quite difficult for us in compliance to try to get a handle on this, because as time has passed, so I've been in the profession now since, probably shouldn't say, should I, 1996. That's a long time, isn't it? And back when I started in the profession, everybody dictated everything and the secretary still had carbon paper. I mean, we were one of the first case management people, blew everyone's mind that we had like a system to put all these things on and emails. But back in those days, the lawyer would have the meeting, come out of the meeting and sit for half an hour with the dictaphone and dictate everything that was said. You had incredibly detailed file notes. As we have moved to a system of having less support staff, less dictation, expecting people to do their own typing, they just don't make the notes anymore. It's quite common that you don't see them, or they rely on their instructions in email passing back and forth. Well, that's all very well, as long as you don't get run over by a proverbial bus, because then nobody knows what you've agreed. It's also very difficult to supervise without sitting down and getting out of your head what it was you were told in the meeting if it's not on the file. So making clear file notes is super important. That the instructions haven't been confirmed back with the client. So again, back in my day, you would take the instructions from the client, you'd do an engagement letter, and in the engagement letter would be a section where you would put, this is what you told me, this is what I understand to be the position, this is what I've advised you, do you agree? So confirming the scope and what they want you to do in correspondence with the client. Again, that's not always there because people are skipping providing that information. And then a misunderstanding between the lawyer and the client. As I say, that can be because, you know, not keeping notes of the meeting, not having the meeting, not taking the time to have the meeting, you know, avoiding phone calls. I'm sure nobody here does that. No one in your firm does that. But, you know, I remember when I was working in the firm in Manchester, regularly, my boss would go around and switch the volume up of all the phones on the floor because people were just turning them down so they didn't answer them. No one here would do that, I'm sure. But speaking to the client and making sure you're checking in the instructions, making sure you're capturing with a similar degree of discipline any changes to those instructions so that there's a proper file note. Yeah, next slide, please. Root causes of not capturing ongoing instructions, the changes to instructions. I've already touched on them, similar kinds of things. They're not captured on the file properly. There's not a file note. You've not checked them back with a client. But here's the other one that I find why we have a root cause of missing changes to instructions is because they're lost in email. So we do correspond, don't we, these days by email, back and forth in massive, great big threads that go on for pages and pages and pages. And it can be quite difficult to keep a track of them, especially if you've got, you know, a client who's, you know, very interested in their matter and you're doing emails back and forth several a day. One of the challenges that we have in keeping on top of this is because we're not transcribing that information into a file note to check, we're leaving them all in the emails. It's really difficult to find them or search them in the email. So one thing that I normally recommend people think about with this when you're using your systems is to change the title of the email in some way or reference it in your system some way so that you go updated instructions for that particular email rather than it just be regarding 24 Market Street. Because, you know, when we do auditing, we go along and look at files and we need to look at the files when we're auditing, like for AML or regulatory compliance. We have to look at the instructions and see if you've been doing what you were supposed to be doing, see if the risk assessment makes sense, that kind of stuff. And we, you know, often these days faced with a system that just shows us all the emails, the heading is your matter, that's it. I'm like, well, which one of these 272 emails is going to tell me what the client wanted them to do? And it's not always the first one either, you know, when you actually get into the instructions. So think about referencing them and making sure you can find them and that they can be referred to easily. In the good old days, of course, we just print it out, wouldn't we, and put it on the inside cover of the file. Those days are gone, so we have to think of a new way of doing it. And then someone else working on the file without full knowledge of the case. So that could be if you, as happens in many firms these days, you've got a team of people working on the particular file. Those instructions are not captured, or they're buried in an email somewhere. Somebody else picking up the file to do a part of the job is not going to see that, especially if you've got partner-led service, but you've got associates, potentially trainees working with you. Making sure everyone can find that information is super important. Next one, please. Okay, precedents. Well, I love a precedent, me. Who likes to reinvent the wheel twice? Nobody. We like to go back to something we've already done. But it is behind a good substantial chunk of claims. And so the root causes of claims emanating from the use of precedents can be that people have got old versions, so they've saved something. So obviously lots of providers out there with different forms and precedents things, you know, long gone are the days you have to go in the library and find the book, which I used to have to do, and then dictate what it says out of the book. It's all online now, just download it. But what people do is they download it to the machine because they can't be bothered remembering the username and password to look at it fresh next time. So they end up with an outdated version or a favorite version that they've adapted for their language that they think is right, but actually in that adaptation, they've changed the meaning of something and it doesn't work anymore. Or and underneath that, why is it? It's training on how to use the system, you know, that leads to people, as well as the username and password, it leads to people just saving the versions on the C drive or wherever it is. Or worse still, taking it out of another file. I'm sure nobody here would do that, but you go in the case that you used it for before, and then you copy and paste that one and you leave some details in it. This is how we get mistakes about numbers, calculations and things, because we copy and paste it from, rather than from the thing that had the boxes in that said fill it in, you filled it in from a different version, and then suddenly your version you're using is wrong. And yeah, the Betty, God love Betty, or you know, Arthur, also he won't use it because you know, he doesn't know how to use the tech. Doesn't make sense, because he had the tech training on the first day when he had all the other training and he's not had to use it for 3 months. So you know, the thing with training, you want just-in-time training. You want to have people be able to get access to how to use their tech, or whatever it is, but tech in particular, at the point in time they're using it. So yes, absolutely, induction training, this is how it works. But when there are tricky bits of it, bits that they're not even tricky, bits they hardly ever use or they rarely use, that's when it's more important to make sure there's just-in-time training, little videos or a little handout that they can look at to refresh themselves of the learning, because you know, we all do forget stuff, don't we, as we're going on. Okay, next slide. So listen, we've looked at some of the most common causes of claims. I think I've given you some practical insight, hopefully, of how they happen and some things that you can start to do to try and minimize the risk. You know, the really important thing is getting that root cause analysis done. I'm a big fan of the 5 whys process. If you Google root cause analysis processes, there's loads of them. I like the 5 whys one because it's just as simple. You just ask yourself why that happened 5 times. It's not rocket science. Nothing I talk about ever is rocket science. But you know what happened. We missed the hearing date for the application that the other side lodged. Why did that happen? Well, we received the court order, but nobody put it into the system. Why did that happen? Well, I delegated it to the secretary and she said she'd do it and she didn't do it. Okay, why did you do that then? Well, I was too busy. Why did you do that then? Because I've got I'm covering someone else's work who's on sick, so I've got twice as much work than I should have, so I'm too busy. Now listen, I'm not saying any of these answers are going to suddenly be fix that on their own and you'll solve these things, but you're going to get a much better picture than landing at human error. Why did we not attend the court hearing? We missed it because the secretary didn't put it on the system. Why was that then human error? You can't do much with that. You've got to drill down into what is the process that failed. What did we say should have happened to avoid this risk and didn't happen? And does that mean we have to change it? So yeah, root cause analysis, 5 whys, super simple. Other ones are available. Now, the other thing that you want, as well as understanding once things have gone wrong, how they happen and trying to close down those loops, is what you want is an early warning system. Now, folks, your early warning system is your supervision activity. That's your early warning system. Okay, because once it gets to a complaint or a claim or a breach, it's too late. It's been done, isn't it? Your early warning system, that's what file reviews and supervision are for. And one of the things that I think that we are missing a trick on is that your data, if you use that to start steering your activity, you can start to get better odds of spotting where there are problems. So my husband, I wrote about him today, it's Valentine's Day, and he works in Teal with me. It's been a rocky 6 years, I won't lie, working with your husband, but he was in compliance as well, just not in the legal sector. He was in quality compliance in engineering. And when we first started talking about our worlds, especially when he came to join my world of legal compliance, he was absolutely astounded by the way in which we do quality management or supervision. In that, it's tiny numbers compared to the amount of work that we're doing. In engineering, you would see very commonly 10 or 20% of the product quality tested to make sure it's delivering what it said it would. And if there are any failures there, you would see the amount tested ramp up to 50 or actually to 100% of what's been produced that particular day to make sure they can root cause where the problem is. But in legal, we don't do that. Now, obviously, in legal, we've got people very well trained, spent years committed to being able to do this job, a very thorough training program as a trainee solicitor of finding out how to do things. You know, we're not just sticking widgets in you know, holes or welding stuff and hoping it sticks together. But you know, and we've got significantly more training than people in industry might have for some of the roles that they do. But we still are human, and until we are impacted by things, that means things can start to go wrong. And yet, in terms of our file reviewing supervision, we do tiny numbers. So, you know, a conveyancer, I mean, let's just, probably any conveyancers are going to say you're living in dreamland, Amy, but let's just say a conveyancer's optimum caseload was 100 jobs. You're probably running 200 or 300 jobs on your list at the minute, but let's just say it was 100, okay? And those churned every 3 months. So you'd get through 400 files, wouldn't you, in a year? And yet we might file review 1 a month, 2 a month. Not many compared to 400 files that you're doing. It's nowhere near 10-20% of them. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating to let's do 10-20%, but if then you're doing that 10-20, that small percentage, that 3-4%, it's actually usually of an average caseload. It's usually less than 1% of a caseload we're doing file reviewing up. So if we're doing those file reviews and then we're drinking our own Kool-Aid, I like to call it, we're picking the small files where no one's done anything so we get through them quickly. Or we're picking the one we already know about because they've been in and talked to us about it. And even though we're not actually picked up the file for file review, and we're going to say we have because we've talked about it. You know, if we're not doing the process properly, our chances of spotting things going wrong earlier are diminishing. I'll talk in a minute about data that's in systems, not just your case management system, other systems you've got. But before we get to do that, how do we get this process of detecting issues early working? So you've got risk data. There'll be some risk data, I'll touch on them in a minute. Inactivity things that you're monitoring for other things, but that have a multi-purpose use to indicate risk. So making sure that you're disciplined in monitoring that data, collecting and monitoring that data. I'll get into the detail of that in a second in the next slide. But file reviewing based on specific risk criteria. So I had a client once, lovely client, I really like them. And I like their approach to compliance. And they had a thing called a 100 Club, which I also love, which was if you got 100% on your file reviews, you got to join the club. Well, I mean, the thing is, you couldn't join the club. You could only leave it because like, if you had 100%, you were in it. And then if you got less than 100%, you'd have to leave it. And they were doing file reviews. This was quite a few years ago, so they probably completely changed now, but they were doing file reviews, 3 per quarter per fee earner regularly. And I said, so you know this 100 Club, how long's it's been running? And they said, oh, it's been running about 3 or 4 years now, Amy. And I went, that's amazing. So you know all these people get 100% every time? They said, yeah. And they've done that consistently for 3 or 4 years. Yeah, all the time. Superstars they are, never have any problems with them. Okay, so why are you still doing 3 of their files? You'd still need to do 3 files a quarter for them. Now there's no like mandated number of file reviews that you need to do, as we've already said, but why are you doing the same number of file reviews on somebody who always gets it right, and you know predictably they're always going to get it right, and the same number on the people who are not doing it right or that are struggling? Your resources, you know, you might want to think about flexing the way that you approach file reviews based on people's performance, based on risk criteria. The risk of this person, then Julia, having any issues in a file reviews is pretty small, because the last 4 years she's always had all of them perfect. She's never had any claims, she's never had any complaints. Well, then let's think about maybe doing less file reviews for her. But Jonathan has been struggling recently. We've got a few complaints in, we've got a claim. Let's have a look and see the extent of this problem. Let's see how we can support him properly. We've got finite resources. Remember, the second cog in my model is capacity. Got to make sure you're using those resources, those finite resources, you know, strategically based on the risk that you've got, if we want to be able to get all this work done. You need a consistent approach to file reviews. I've already mentioned not picking up the smallest file for file review. Here's the other one. Do not let a lawyer give you their files that they want you to file review. Okay, no one here would do that, Sam. But one day, one of the most tricky cases that I ever had to deal with was concerning a small firm. They were about to need to close their firm. So I don't know if you know this, but every year there's a number of firms that have to close because they're unable to get professional indemnity insurance. The insurers just have decided that they don't want to insure that particular business. This business employed about 24 people, and it was going to have to shut on Christmas Eve if it couldn't get insurance. And what had happened was that in the past, they'd had an issue with a lawyer who was, let's just say that his conduct on some files had some red flags for money laundering. There's quite a few of them, these files, in fact, half his caseload. And it'd been for over an 18-month period, there'd been some problems with these files. And I said to the firm, why did we not pick this up? It's half of his caseload, you know. Well, the thing is, when we come, he was working in a branch office, and when the supervising partner came to see him, he would present all the files there. Here's the file, I've got them all ready for you. All you've got to do is file review. Of course, he picked the perfect file that had nothing to do with the alleged baddie. He picked the beautiful textbook files. So the supervisor was supervising those, thought there was no problem at all. And underneath it, there was all of these problems which nearly put the business, them out of business. So please, please, please make sure that you pick the files. Please use risk criteria. Don't let people pick their own files for file reviewing, and be disciplined about that. Make sure everybody else is disciplined about that. I'm sure no one in your firm is trying to game your system, but if they are, and I say this, right, emerging as the 5th cause of claim, it wasn't on my slide, but underwriters are now starting to recognise that mental health issues, burnout, stress are starting to contribute to claim. Okay, now people who are burnt out, stressed, or suffering from a mental health issue can start to get scared. Okay, I say this because I've been there myself, right? They start to get scared and they start to get panicked that you're going to spot how badly they're doing, and that's going to affect their career. And so that's when they start bringing you the nice files. That's when they start gaming your system, because they're scared. This is why I'm saying, for people who you do know are struggling, offer them more support. Check that they're getting things right. Offer them more supervision to support them, to give them a safety net, that these things are being checked and that they're not on their own. We are going to have, you know, I'm sure I'll be back next year for a whole talk on this, because this is going to be so important for us to get our head around. How do we react to these issues that we see of people's mental well-being, and how do they relate to how we have to support them from a risk and compliance point of view? So yeah, supervision. Don't let them pick their own files. Don't let them try and play to your weakness and suggest that, you know, that file we just had a chat on, why don't you put that one down for file reviewing or for supervision? You've not even seen the file, but you've had a good chat about it, or at least the chat they wanted to have with you about it, not the real chat that they need to have with you, or the real thing you need to know about it. Okay, so again, consistent approach. You're picking the file, don't scrimp on it. Please don't scrimp on it. Improve root cause analysis. We've just talked about that with your 5 whys. And then we've got monitoring controls. I've talked about your controls, your thing on the back of the door at McDonald's. I mean, what would your controls be? I have spent quite a lot of time over the last maybe 4 years thinking about controls for every policy. Here's what my advice would be to creating a control, your equivalent to the McDonald's sign on the back of the toilet door. When you do your policy and your procedure, sit in the seat of someone who's trying not to follow it, figure out what that would look like, and then test if that's happening. That's how you do it. So confidential waste. If you do have confidential waste, you know, people are at home a lot these days, aren't they? They're still back in the office, but, you know, we're supposed to put confidential waste in the shred bin, aren't we? Not in the normal bin. The procedure says use a shred bin to maintain client's confidentiality. The person who's not following that process is going to put the paper in the normal bin. So that's why you check the normal bin. Everybody with me? You sit in the seat of the person who's trying to not do it and check that. Is how you build controls for things. And then capture all complaints. So I used to talk about in complaints training, complaints with a big C and a complaints with a little c. So obviously a complaint with a big C is going to go through your process, might end up at the ombudsman. We all know about those ones. It's the complaints with the little c that start to mount up, that your early warning system, that they're not returning phone calls because they're too busy, that they're not responding to emails, that it was short and they didn't get the detail that they wanted. These things are starting to tell you that somebody's overloaded, they've got too much work to do. And when you've got too much work to do, you get actionless blindness. You can't see the things you're supposed to be doing. Next slide, please, Sam.
Just before I do, we're running a bit behind time. I think a smart thing to do is obviously keep going if everybody's happy to.
I've only got a couple more. Three more.
Anybody who does have to drop off, we'll send a recording round of everything anyway. So you won't.
Perfect. Cool. So I did promise at the very beginning, where should you check? What should you look at? What risk data have you got? So many firms do have inactivity flags, usually on their account system. So it will show time since the length of time since something was time recorded on this matter, the length of time since it was billed, something like that. Or these days, I think you can have actually opened and someone did something with it. You know, tech's an amazing thing and evolving all the time. So inactivity is a key one to check. Just be careful though. Somebody who's scared and knows that you're checking inactivity, time records junk time and then writes it off. So high write it off values is something else that you want to have a look at. Why was that all that time on there? Higher than expected WIP estimates. Somebody is trying to do the work, but they're literally sat there and have no idea what to do. And suddenly an hour's gone by. So the WIP is starting to creep up higher than you'd expect. High client account balances. That's a good one to check in case people are not on top of, you know, doing the billing, moving the money. Obviously, we've got banking facilities, things that we think about there as well. Average case length is a great one to measure. We know typically how long things are going to take. Sometimes they take more. Average case length being exceeded can be an indicator that someone's got too much work to do, or that they are particularly struggling with some of their caseload. You know, the thing is, in the old days, you just walk into their office and look at the file that were gathering dust on the floor to find this information, or in the back of a filing cabinet somewhere. These days, we've got to look at the tech to try and replicate the same information. If you have got them that are exceeding the average case length, maybe those are the ones you want to do file reviews on. Yes, I'm sorry, there will be some of the thicker ones, but you're going to want to understand why these are not being settled in the time that you'd expect it. Is the person struggling? Is it just a time issue with them? Or are they actually stuck on something? Files without client care letters returned. A lot of systems capture that data. What is the date they return the client care letter as a key control? You want that to make sure that you can bill them and that they've agreed to your terms. But you know, what if it never got sent in the first place? There's a whole load of compliance breaches that come from an engagement letter not being sent to a client. So if you've got files where they're not coming back, check why that is. In my experience, they used because they've got a general retainer. Probably they haven't. It's just that they've had that client for ages and that's just what they say, and they just don't want to do what you want them to do. But your terms change, you do want to make, and there's information you've got to give clients, so you do want to make sure that the letters are going out in accordance with your case. And then the files without CDD. You know, the regulator, when it comes to AML, would prefer you not to give file numbers until CDD has been collected, or the ID&V bit of CDD, the identification part of it, because then they'll know that every file that is open has got the identity documents on it. But many firms, especially in conveyancing, that's not that sensible. You are giving people usually, you're opening a file and then you're writing to them asking them for information, or you're sending them the link after you've opened the file to be able to do the search, whatever it is, with the facial recognition and things. So if you're going to let people open the file without a file number, you might want to have a control in your system that says I can run a report of all the files that haven't got the CDD on it, haven't confirmed that they have, that are open, and you might want to look at those and find out what the holdup is. Just a little point, next slide please, Sam. Just a little point on client due diligence systems. Before the 2019 money laundering regulations, you had a lot of the client ID systems, which were where you would collect information from the client, you put it into the system and you'd check for a number of passes. And if you weren't meeting the client and you didn't have any paper documents, you would probably set the bar quite high. So you'd need 4 or 5 or 6 matches before you'd be satisfied that that person is that person. The 2019 money laundering regulations brought this section in at regulation 2819B that says that if you are using electronic verification for identity, the process needs to be secure from fraud and misuse and capable of providing an appropriate level of assurance that the person claiming a particular identity is in fact the person with that identity. If you put data into a system and get matches for it, it just proves that a person with that data is in the system. Doesn't necessarily prove that the person providing you with instructions is that person. And that's why now what we see with the electronic verification systems, if you want to use them without getting any paper and you want to be compliant with the money laundering regulations, you're likely to have something that either validates a document as part of that process or the person with the document, so with the biometrics and all of that kind of thing. So yeah, just a note about the providers that you are looking at and making sure that the system can provide that level of assurance to them. And then the last thing about using data to manage your compliance, last slide, Sam, is around, thank you, is around source of funds, source of wealth. So a few years ago, there was this thing, open banking, you might have heard about it. It's where that people can share data or access direct into bank accounts for various things. Account swapping, I think, was the original rationale for it. So it was easy for people to change their account from one provider to another. But it's led to a huge development in the use of technology and source of funds, source of wealth. A couple of things I just think about. When you are trying to comply with the money laundering regulations, you're not just complying with source of funds, source of wealth. The actual requirement is to comply with the to understand the purpose and nature that includes source of funds, source of wealth for a transaction, but it's not the only thing. So please don't think that just by dialing straight into someone's bank account, you don't have to think about what the job was or any other way that they might have got their wealth. Just looking in the bank account's not going to be a cure-all for that. But there are great open banking opportunities to look straight into someone's bank account at the data. Some of the providers will analyze or draw out observations about that data. Again, just because you do get a report from someone saying this is like the top 10 transactions or something like that, that's not the only thing you should be thinking about. What you're asking yourself in looking at source of funds, source of wealth is, does this match what they told me? Does this make sense? And is there any behavior here that makes me think that they might be money launderers? That's what you're actually looking for, as well as, you know, that they're good for the money and it's in there. One of the other things I'd encourage you to have a little think about is in response to the old dream bar case. If any conveyances, it's only relevant really to conveyances, I think, but if your conveyances on, you'll remember the dream bar case where somebody impersonated the seller of a property. Mr. Dream Bar bought it and his money ended up with a fraudster. Now, here's an interesting thing. They're just in government at the minute discussing failure to prevent fraud. Well, that is fraud, folks, when somebody impersonates a baddie. Law firms will likely, if this amendment goes through into the new Economic Crime Act, require firms to prevent fraud, and there will be an offence of failing to prevent fraud. So you're going to want to make sure you've got systems and processes in place to try and prevent fraud. One of the ways you can prevent a dream bar fraud is make sure that the sale monies, if you're acting for the seller, go to the seller, which means you've got an open banking opportunity there because the baddie hasn't got access to the owner of the property's bank account. So checking out, not just on source of funds, a purchaser's funds, but starting to think about the destination of the funds, where that's going, and checking that out. I think that's going to be a really important point going forward. Cool. So hopefully I've told you what compliance is about, how to build a compliance program that works, some of the common causes of claims, and how to use the data in your system to start anticipating if things are starting to go wrong through your file review and supervision processes. That's it.
Amazing. Thank you, Amy. We've still got lots of people on, and we can carry on and do some Q&A. I haven't got any questions yet, so if anybody does have them, please pop them in the Q&A button now, and we can come to them. You covered a whole load of stuff there, and I know there's loads of things that I'm kind of excited about in our system, whether they're kind of tools or dashboards or supervision tools that I know can help, and even some of the source of funds and the onboarding stuff that you talked about there as well. So I know there's a ton of things there that can help people avoid these things, and also track and monitor some of them as well. Adam, I don't know if you've got any comments just while we're waiting to see if any questions come through. Still lots of people on the webinar. So.
No, I think if you flip on a slide, Sam.
I'm happy with that.
You happy with that? And if you flip on another slide, I think I'll just make some observations.
Sure.
That's great for me, Amy. Thank you. I think that's really informative. And I think importantly, you know, as you say, the software can't do everything, but it can certainly help do an awful lot of the compliance management within the software. And I think importantly, you know, within PracticeEvolve, for those who don't know, you know, our link with InfoTrack gives you access to a number of different tools that really help your compliance requirements. And then similarly, you know, we ensure that you're almost compliant all the way through from the process, from engaging clients at the early stages, performing that due diligence, executing the work, billing and collecting funds, and really applying those learnings then to the actual compliance process, I suppose. And I think just similarly on that slide there, you know, importantly, Amy, you talked very much about process, training, reviewing and communication. And the training element is really important to us. It's why we've launched Evolve Learning, to really make sure that users are aware of new techniques, aware of new products, aware of new processes, but also for anyone new coming into a business, they want to be trained in the right way. So, you know, a lot of that we can work with Amy and InfoTrack in terms of extending that as well, and really applying a more compliant area for that. So yeah, and I think, you know, just for us, we're very much better connected with InfoTrack to help people meet those compliant requirements. So just my comments, and I think that slide kind of demonstrates that, but ultimately, you know, for us, it's about addressing client experience and removing that risk, improving efficiencies and productivity, and really just committing to a level of service for everyone by being better connected. Any questions there, Sam? You're on mute, Sam.
Apologies, there you go. No questions through. Well, there's one that I'm just answering offline, which there's more coming in. Okay, let's just see. So another question.
Yeah, I'm reading that. So digital ID and AML isn't pulling in details from PracticeEvolve. Sorry, you've sent that anonymously. We can take a look at that for you. If it's pulling across the details. So if you could let me know who you are, and then we can have a look at that for you.
Great. So yeah, please just message Adam directly there, or send us a note afterwards. Another question just about the recording. Yes, so we will send you everybody a recording of the webinar after this, including the Q&A part as well.
Okay, yeah, Simon, nice to see you. Okay, we'll take a look at that. Come back to you, Simon.
Thank you.
Tracy, if you're not familiar with PracticeEvolve, if you visit practiceevolve.com, and or by all means, I can take your name and have someone give you a quick call.
Okay. Okay, in terms of CPD certificates, Adam?
Yeah, we can take care of that. I know obviously we have some people on who's still under different rules and not necessarily the Law Society, so yeah, we can take care of that. So Sam, we'll pick up and address that shortly.
Perfect, that'd be good. So CPD certificate will come out from Adam.
Perfect. Well, I just picking up on just one last point, really, just one reflection about the your contents of your file review forms. I know certain systems have got them, and I'm not familiar with them all. But in designing them, one thing I would say is, as much as possible, you do want to be consistent across departments, but different departments have different things that they want to check. So, you know, it's okay to have flexible ones for different teams. The most important thing with your file reviews, though, is that you react to your findings. That's the most important thing, that whatever you are finding from them. So, you know, for example, some of the breaches that you might find, some of the issues that you might find on a file review are actually compliance breaches. And in my experience, they're not always escalated to the relevant person. So making sure that you respond to them properly is a good thing to think about.
Good. Excellent. I think come to a natural end of the questions. So I would just like to say thank you to Adam, and thank you very much, Amy, for the presentation. Excellent, getting lots of good feedback and thank yous. Always much appreciated. Like we said, we'll send around CPD certificates and a recording of this as well. If anybody wants any more information, there you go, just to make sure these will be on your recording, as well as the contact details of the various organisations, or obviously you can just reply to the emails that go out as well. So thank you all very much for attending, and happy Valentine's Day again. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Cheers. Bye-bye. Thanks, Amy. Bye.